Scott Laughlin, SiriusXM NHL Radio. Joins us, talk some NHL bubble and more right now. Scott, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, Josh. Great to be back with you.
Great to have you back on. So, first of all, I got to get your reaction to the Seattle Krakens. How do you feel about that?
I love it. I think it's a big day for them. It's a big day for the National Hockey League. I like the name. I like the logo. I like the sweaters and the renderings that we've had so far for the home and road sweaters. I think they've struck upon the great color scheme that seems to have worked fairly well for the Seahawks and for the Seattle Sounders out there in Major League Soccer and such. So I think this is a pretty big day for that franchise out there. And we just talked to Ron Francis a short time ago, their general manager. And, this is another step in the right direction towards that team taking the ice, the arena, the Climate Pledge Arena, which is going to be a state-of-the-art, environmentally friendly type arena, the first of its kind, is really starting to take shape as well. The old Key Arena roof is going to be left behind there for them to build around and from. So things are heading in the right direction for that franchise. They seem to be on track to start when they anticipated that they would start. And I think today was a pretty successful day all in all for the Seattle Kraken.
I'm curious, how quickly do you think that they will be competitive? Because a team like Vegas, they were competitive way quicker than someone like me expected. So, is that too much to expect from Seattle to do what Vegas did?
Yeah, I think it is, Josh. I think that was a once-in-a-lifetime type scenario that the Vegas Golden Knights took advantage of. And they had a very astute general manager, George McPhee, that knew how to work it. Not only was he going to select good players, but he worked the phones in advance of the expansion draft, and he picked up so many different assets for his organization, whether it be draft picks and or players. He not only got the players he wanted, but he was given more to stay away from certain players that previous team tried to protect in the draft. So George McPhee, I think, pulled the rug out from under a lot of fellow GMs back then, right around the time the expansion draft was about to take place. And I think because of what George did, I think that Ron Francis is going to be up against it. He's not going to be able to do that. I don't think that NHL GMs are going to fall for that again. They're going to say, you know what? We've left 6 or 7 guys here that could play for you unprotected. Go to it. We're not going to give you a draft pick. We're not going to give you another player with which to entice you to stay away from a certain guy that we want to protect. So do with that what you will. That being said, I think $650 million these days, Josh, buys you some competitive things and aspects of your organization right off the hop. It's kind of what you buy into. The days, Josh, of the Washington Capitals being horrible in 74, 75, and the Ottawa Senators coming back into the early 1990s and just being abysmal, those days are long gone. Now you pay a certain price to get in. That's what Mr. Bonderman and Mr. Bruckheimer have done out there in Seattle, and I think they're going to get what they pay for. And what they're going to pay for, I think, Josh, is here a pretty competitive team right off the hop. I'm not saying playoffs. I'm certainly not saying Stanley Cup final like Vegas did, but I don't think that they're going to embarrass themselves. In fact, I think they're going to be quite successful off the hop.
Well, that's good to know because obviously the more competitive the teams are, the better for the on-ice products. Speaking of the on-ice products, Scott, we are just now rounding in the form of the teams traveling to these 2 hub cities. And the last time you and I talked, they hadn't announced these hub cities yet. I'm curious from you, what are some of the logistics going to be for Edmonton and Toronto? Because, just on the ground, these are 2 very different cities.
No, absolutely. Look, I've been to both of these cities. I live just outside of Toronto now. I've pretty much lived here my entire life. So I've got as good a handle on the city of Toronto as anybody out there. And Edmonton I've been to a bunch of times over the years as well. And let's put it this way, Edmonton's a much better place to be at in the summertime than it is during the winter, of course, where the snowstorms can pop up there in northern Alberta. But look, I think the similarities here are the fact that, they're going to have the wherewithal, both in Toronto in the east and Edmonton in the west, to have a lot for these players to do. Now, that being said, though, Josh, we do have to take into consideration what has to happen here is players are going to be in this quote-unquote secure zone for up to 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, then they can go outside the quote-unquote secure zone that they've set up for these players, and that is they can expand a little bit and go get a round or two of golf. And if they want to do that, if they want to do some sightseeing, they'll be able to do that down the road. But the first couple of weeks, once they get to Toronto in the east and Edmonton in the west, it's going to be about basically quarantining, and all they're going to be doing is basically going from the hotel to the practice rink, to the Scotiabank Arena, or to the practice rink and to Rogers Place. And there are going to be some teams that will be in for a good time, not a long time. They won't be around for 2 weeks because, as we know, Josh, after 2 weeks is when we really get down to the playoffs and the round of 16, and the Flyers will be a big part of that certainly in going forward and that sort of thing. So I think the first couple of weeks it's going to be about playing hockey and playing hockey only. After the first couple of weeks go by, then these players can start to do some extracurricular type activities. But they seem to have all the bases covered. Most importantly, I think they seem to have spent a lot of money on testing, and it's going to be pretty much something that players have to adhere to on a daily basis if they want to maintain this thing and going forward.
Yeah, and speaking of that, we know that in the NBA bubble, once they got everybody to the bubble, they've had 0 tests. And whereas the NHL, it seems like every round of testing, they've gotten fewer and fewer positives. So it seems like at least the logistics for the NHL, like the NBA, are in line to make sure everyone is safe and everything's accounted for.
Well, you're right. I mean, the big thing here, phase 3, getting to phase 4, which is basically dropping the puck. I mean, part of phase 4 is initially going to be getting to the bubble coming up on Sunday. And you're right. These have been the times that we've all been concerned about, right? We're hearing that this player is unable to practice or unable to participate. A guy like Corey Crawford, the goaltender with the Chicago Blackhawks, once again today just not on the ice. That's got to be of grave concern to the Blackhawks, who are thinking if we're going to somehow upset the high-powered Edmonton Oilers, we need to have number 50, the guy who's won a couple of Stanley Cups, between the pipes for us. That right now seems to be in doubt because he's been unable to participate, unable to practice. He's had some concussion issues. You don't know if it's COVID-19 related. You don't know if it's muscle related, whatever the case may be. Corey Crawford has not been on the ice for the Blackhawks in training camp thus far. And again, when you look at where they're at now, every day goes by and he's not on the ice. You have to think that that's got to be a realistic situation where perhaps he doesn't play against the Edmonton Oilers. And if he doesn't play against Edmonton, the Hawks have no chance to win that series. So you're right. I mean, this time here in the days that have led up to going to the hubs and jumping on these flights coming up on Sunday, they have been the nail-biting, nerve-wracking times, I think, for these NHL teams.
Speaking of getting back on the ice, you let me right into the next topic, which is the Flyers with Carter Hart. He was seen back on the ice today practicing, which is big news for the Flyers after he was reportedly missing time with those back spasms. How important in your mind is Carter Hart's play to the Flyers' success when they get back on the ice in this tournament?
Oh, it's absolutely huge, Josh. There's no question about that. I mean, Brian Elliott, to his credit, has done well in the backup role this season. When Carter Hart missed that time earlier in the campaign, there was Brian Elliott to at least keep the team competitive, if not win games for the Flyers. So credit to him as a veteran, reliable backup. But if you're going to make the run that Philadelphia hopes that they can make, it's going to be on the back of a guy like Carter Hart. He's had the resume. He's been biding his time. He's played in a couple of World Junior Hockey Championships. He had great numbers, of course, as all Flyers fans know, when he played out in the Western Hockey League there at Everett. He's the type of guy that just appears to be built for this type of situation, for this type of stage. I don't think this type of theater is going to overwhelm him. That said, he's got some back spasms he's been trying to bite through and to fight through. And the reality is, as we know, Josh, I mean, back spasms, they can be fleeting, right? I mean, you could have a back issue and it could, seize up on you 1 week, go away for a week or two, and all of a sudden flare up again. We certainly hope that's not going to be the case with number 79, but I think Carter Hart just holds all the keys to what Philadelphia hopes to do here. I like what Couturier's done this season. Konechny, you still got the old reliable Claude Giroux, the old reliable Jake Voracek as well to lead the offense up front. But it's not incumbent on those guys to do it now that Couturier and Konechny in particular have stepped forward. And again, it was interesting yesterday to hear Chuck Fletcher not officially rule out the fact that a guy like Oscar Lindblom, congratulations to the great story that Oscar Lindblom has been. He gets the new 3-year contract. But it was interesting to hear Chuck not officially kind of rule him out. In fact, he almost seemed like on the conference call yesterday that they were really toying with the idea of making him a part of the 31 players that will make up this postseason roster.
Yeah, that's been a huge story around here. I mean, just the fact that he's overcome everything. He's come. A lot of the players have really dedicated the season to Oscar Lindblom. But I want to touch on another guy you just mentioned there was Sean Couturier, a finalist for the Selke Trophy. What is the perspective from the league as a whole on a guy like Sean Couturier? Because, here in Philadelphia, a lot of times people talk about, Giroux and Voracek, but a guy like Couturier, you could argue, might be the most important guy on the ice from night to night.
Well, I tell you what, Josh, he was a leading scorer in the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League at one point. So I think we always knew that the offensive side of the game was going to be there with Sean Couturier. We also know, of course, he had the bloodlines. His dad, Sylvain, played in the NHL, albeit briefly. But Sean's actually a guy, as we've seen, that has really grown in leaps and bounds the past couple of years. The type of guy you can play in every conceivable situation. He's a big-bodied guy that can certainly match up against any guy in the league when it comes to taking draws and to playing the defensive side of the game. But I think it's the offense, too, that's been there for him for the most part, also trailing just Travis Konecny on the team in terms of scoring. So we've seen the all-around game just really take shape for Couturier here the past couple of years. I think that's a lot for Flyers fans to get excited about. Does he have enough right now to win the Selke at this stage? Or going up against PB37, Patrice Bergeron, and Ryan O'Reilly, is he just sort of kind of waiting his time for his moment in the sun? Because when you look at Bergeron, whenever he's healthy, he's been productive. He's also the type of guy that plays in every conceivable situation. There's a reason why he's been nominated now like 9 straight seasons, which is remarkable. That's Pavel Datsyuk-like, I think, when you look at what Patrice Bergeron's done. Couturier, though, just such a key part. You're right up front in leading that Flyers attack and then being defensively responsible to boot.
I'm curious because you mentioned about Bergeron, how many times he's been nominated. Sometimes in the NBA they talk about, for example, well, so-and-so won an award X number of times. There's an attitude that you need to give someone else a chance. So is that happen in hockey too, where sometimes a guy gets nominated to win awards so many times, but then the voters are like, all right, he's gotten enough times, we got to give it to somebody else?
Yeah, it's almost sometimes the opposite, I find, Josh, that, it's like the Pro Bowl voting, right? You see guys going to the Pro Bowl and you're thinking, well, that guy was great a couple of years ago, but he didn't necessarily have that type of season this season that should have had him in the Pro Bowl. It's almost like by reputation. I think people instinctively say, well, you know what, and this is not to respect any player who's been nominated year after year after year, but sometimes it's sort of without even, opening up the book, you're kind of making the determination as to who it is or what kind of season he had because of the reputation that has preceded him. So I think when you've done it as long and as well and as consistently well as Patrice Bergeron has done, as long as you stay healthy for the most part and you put up numbers, everybody knows what you are as a defensive player, as a guy who can win key faceoffs. I think that goes a long, long way. So I could see it both ways. I can see sometimes it's reputation that has a guy automatically nominated for an NHL award. I also think, to your point as well, that people like to kind of filter in some new kids on the block a little bit there. I just don't know if the time for Couturier is right now. I think it's probably still going to go to Patrice Bergeron when it's all said and done, but Couturier is far from done in terms of having his name up for Selke consideration. This is something that I think we're going to have to get used to for years to come.
Scott Laughlin joining us here on the Boardwalk on the Hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Make sure to follow him on Twitter at Laughlin SXM, SiriusXM NHL Radio. Scott, then the big picture question with the Flyers is about the Eastern Conference. Yeah, they're one of the 4 teams, but how do they match up versus the other 3 teams? Because we know Tampa, Boston, Washington, we know their pedigree, but how do the Flyers compare to those 3?
Boy, that's a great question. I can't wait to find out the answer to this, Josh. And look, Philadelphia's had such a remarkable season. Alain Vigneault couldn't have scripted it any better than has transpired for this team. Again, I talked about the transition from, the older guard like Claude Giroux and Jake Voracek to Travis Konecny, who went to the All-Star Weekend in St. Louis, and Sean Couturier up for the Selke Trophy, the emergence of Provorov and Sanheim on the blue line, the insulation that was provided by Chuck Fletcher when he brought in the likes of Justin Braun and Matt Niskanen, who've made such a difference on the back end. And then, of course, what they expected to get from Carter Hart, they generally have received from Carter Hart. So, look, they're going to have to play well, certainly. I still probably like Boston, I think, Josh, to win the Eastern Conference again. I think they've got a lot of unfinished business here that they were close to, finalizing in the regular season. They hope to pick up where they left off, and they've got a whole lot of know-how and veteran pedigree on that Boston club that I think is going to serve them well here in terms of paying attention to detail and such in a rather unique situation that we're about to find ourselves in with watching games in empty arenas and that sort of thing. So, look, Philadelphia's in the mix. I mean, they're one of the top 4 seeds. They're in the bye round for a reason. I think if they play to their capability, we saw that when the pandemic hit, unexpectedly, Josh, that they were one of the hottest teams in the league. I believe they lost their final game before they went to the break, but before that, they were on that remarkable run. So it's incumbent upon them to, I think, take the bye round games seriously. And I think each team's going to do it, but we also heard Bruce Cassidy say that because we're in the bye round, because we do have some wiggle room, they may sit a player or two when it comes to the bye round, because you're playing for reseeding. As they say, eventually you'll have to beat the best teams anyway. I think Philadelphia is that team, though, that they showed that once they got some momentum, they got the ball rolling in the right direction. A very formidable opponent for sure, and I think that'll be the case once we get to the round of 16 in the playoffs.
Scott, one more for you before we get out of here, and that is, I'm curious about the teams 5 through 12, some very intriguing matchups there in the round robin. Which of those teams 5 through 12 could really shake up everything? Because how many times have we seen it? Teams like the LA Kings and others, you're an 8 seed, you still have a chance to win the cup. Well, who's the team in the Eastern Conference in that 5 to 12 range? And if they get through, they could really shake up and just rock the world of those top 4 teams.
Well, I know Flyers fans, Josh, don't want to hear this, but I'd be afraid of the New York Rangers because I think they're far ahead of their schedule. I think they've got a Hart Trophy nominee, certainly in Artemi Panarin. The Breadman has come in as advertised for sure. I think the Rangers have a young and developing blue line. I think that they've got enough scoring up front. Zibanejad has really emerged, and I think will be the next captain of the Rangers when push comes to shove. They've got a 3-headed monster in goal. I think Shesterkin is probably going to take the keys to the car now from the King, Lundqvist. But this is what probably scares Canes fans the most, I think, Josh. The Rangers are 31-6 against Carolina dating back to February of 2011. So 31-6 against the Canes going back to February of 2011. Now, the guy who's been in net for most, if not all of those victories, has been Lundqvist. We saw before the break, though, the King had pretty much lost his throne, and Igor Shesterkin was the guy who had kind of taken control of that situation. I think, and David Quinn, the Rangers head coach, said earlier today that they're not going to announce their starter for that series against Carolina until the day before, perhaps even the day of game number 1 against the Canes. I think that ultimately his decision is going to be to go to Igor Shesterkin, who's won 10 of his first 12 NHL starts, has come from the Continental Hockey like Ilya Sorokin's going to do for the New York Islanders. And I think that Shesterkin's about ready to take control of this situation with the Rangers for the next decade or so. And that's why I think the Rangers are dangerous, because of all the reasons that mentioned. They're also a team that once they get rolled, I think they will in Carolina. I think they're going to roll into that round of 16 with a whole lot of momentum.
He's Scott Laughlin. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at Laughlin SXM, SiriusXM, NHL Radio. All guests he appeared right here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Scott, always appreciate the time, and I'm sure we'll be touching base as the hockey pucks actually start hitting the ice and we get to see some of the results of some of this action.
I can't wait, Josh. Thanks for having me as always.